Good afternoon and welcome to the Center for Strategic and International Studies. You are here for an event on the rise of nutrition. We're going to be talking about global nutrition and particularly the role of the U.S. government. So that's going to include talking about interagency coordination, how they can better leverage impact, as well as funding, hot topic this week, and the tremendous return on investment that there is with nutrition programming. And yes, we are also going to talk about what this might all look like under the Trump administration. Many of you in this room are not going to disagree with me when I say that nutrition is a pillar of development. You know, whether you're talking about infectious diseases, food security, or education, nutrition is crucial to economic prosperity and growth. In fact, if you're unaware of this, I find it quite interesting. 12 of the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals include nutrition indicators. And that really reflects nutrition's central role across a spectrum of key development outcomes. Yet, only 1% of foreign aid is allocated to basic nutrition. You know, for the past 2 years, I just hit my anniversary. I've been here at CSIS leading our global food security work, and a lot of people ask me sort of what my key priority areas are. And I've always said that one of those has been nutrition, because to me, nutrition and agriculture development are inexorably linked. And on a personal level, I'm really excited that we're launching a paper and that we're having this event that's very specific on the power of nutrition. I'd like to take a moment and thank Carol Conragan, who's a consultant who wrote the report that hopefully you grabbed on your way in today called Staying Power. And you know, when we did this report, we wanted to look very specifically at the U.S. government's global coordination, I always get this tongue-tied, the U.S. government's global nutrition coordination plan. But when you look at this, I don't want you to overlook chapter 1, which is surprisingly my favorite chapter because it sort of goes over the global nutrition movement over the last decade. So it's a great resource for those of you who may be new to nutrition. It's a great reminder for those of you who have been in this field for some time. Because when you look back over the last decade or so, I would call kind of a nutrition revival has happened. And there's been this surge of attention and evidence. So everything from the World Health Organization in 2006, when it revisited its it's revisited its child growth standards, you know, all the way to the Lancet series of 2008 and 2013, which many of you are probably familiar with, where it really showed groundbreaking scientific evidence around the first 1,000 days, but also around the linkages between malnutrition and the global burden of disease. There's also, of course, the Copenhagen Consensus in 2012 that really explained the economics behind nutrition investments. And then, as many of you know, in 2015, the United Nations General Assembly actually pledged to end all forms of malnutrition by 2030. A tall order, but impressive and laudable. So what's the U.S. government's role in all of this? You know, it's nothing new in the sense of that the U.S. government has been a leader in global nutrition for a long time. You look back from the 1950s through things like Food for Peace, so food aid has been given globally. And then you look at things like Feed the Future that was launched in 2010. And, you know, nutrition was right at the center of that. One of its top 2 goals is the reduction of stunting. And you even look at programs like the McGovern-Dole International Food for Education and Child Nutrition Program worldwide that's providing nutritious school meals, and that's through the USDA. The McGovern-Dole program, for example, has really strong bipartisan support, but it's one of many programs that's under threat under the new administration's budget. So the Global Nutrition Coordination Plan, I'm not going to go into a lot of depth on that because Ann Peniston, who I'll introduce in a minute, is going to talk about that. But one thing that struck me about this, being a former U.S. government employee myself, is that this wasn't a mandate, this wasn't an initiative, this was a voluntary effort by people who were committed to nutrition to say, how can we better coordinate our efforts across agencies? And it's a really good example of collaboration for mutual learning, for getting agencies out of their silos. And any of you here means you're interested in U.S. government coordination and policy in some way. You know how difficult that can be. So it gave an opportunity for technical expertise, such as USAID or MCC, to coordinate with people like at Peace Corps or FDA or NIH. And it's really something that other technical domains could consider emulating. It's a little too soon to tell to see how it's going to work. It was just launched last year. We kind of realized that as we were going into the report, we're like, we should really do this like a year from now. But we still wanted to dig in a little bit deeper and see how the progress was going. And again, Anne will elaborate this a little bit more in her opening remarks. You know, this week I went to CARE's national conference, and the theme at their conference was now more than ever. And it's such a great choice of words that I'm just going to borrow it, so thank you, CARE, without asking. But it's such a good phrase, now more than ever, because if you think about it, right now there's this momentum around nutrition within USAID, within the US government. There certainly has been for some time within the international community. And now more than ever, we really need to sustain this momentum. But that means we need to understand, and we need to be able to make the case in both business terms and economic terms. It means we need to show evidence of its importance and its economic value, particularly at a time when policymakers are trying to determine the best way that we can maximize our tax dollars. And we're going to learn from our experts today of how investing in nutrition can advance our U.S. interest and how nutrition can promote health and wealth and political stability. So we're going to start with Ann Piniston, when I can get my notes together. There we go. Ann is the Chief of Nutrition and Environmental Health Division in the Global Health Bureau at USAID. Ann is both a clinician, a researcher, and a program manager. She is a nurse practitioner, but she has spent decades living overseas and decades working on USAID programs and across the whole public health spectrum. So while she certainly understands the nutrition space, she also understands domestic public health as well as public health issues in terms of family planning, maternal and child health, and HIV/AIDS. We are very grateful that she has been a collaborator with us for our report from the beginning, and that she knows more than anyone about how this global coordination plan is progressing and what we can expect for it in the years to come. Ann.
Thank you. Thank you, Kimberly. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Kimberly, and thank you, CSIS, for giving me an opportunity to deliver a few remarks about the tongue twister, U.S. government Global Nutrition Coordination Plan. Even I have to stumble over it a little bit. Frankly, we just call it the plan among us. I'm really honored to be here representing my hardworking, dedicated interagency colleagues from 11 different departments and agencies who jointly conceived and developed the plan. And it took us about 3 years. That's how hardworking and dedicated we were and how committed we were to making sure that our product would be the best that we could have. You may be aware that UNICEF and WHO recently released the latest data on the status of malnutrition around the world. There are now 155 million children under 5 who are chronically malnourished, in other words, stunted, and 52 million children who suffer from wasting or acute malnutrition. A child suffering from severe acute malnutrition is 9 times more likely to die from common infections. Severe acute malnutrition causes an estimated 1 to 2 million preventable child deaths every year. And each year, chronic malnutrition costs the global economy over $3 trillion as a result of healthcare costs and lost productivity. As the 2017 World Bank report illustrated, every dollar invested in nutrition interventions would yield an estimated $4 to $35 in economic return. Investing in nutrition, therefore, gives us one of the highest returns on investment of any development activity. We in the U.S. well recognize that well-nourished populations contribute productively to national development and economic security. And to support these efforts, the U.S. has been the largest donor of nutrition programs around the world. Our programs have included human nutrition research, nutrition information systems, food safety, food fortification, breastfeeding promotion, infant and young child feeding, working with agriculturalists on nutrient-rich agricultural value chains, emergency food assistance, and much more. So in June of 2013, at the Nutrition for Growth event in London, the then USAID Administrator, Dr. Raj Shah, made several commitments that included financial and non-financial pledges. Two of the commitments were, first of all, that USAID would develop an agency-wide multi-sectoral nutrition strategy, and two, that the US government would also coordinate better under a unified strategy or plan. USAID completed its strategy in 2014, and the US Global Nutrition Coordination Plan was completed and released last June. So the plan describes the US government agencies' respective strengths in a whole-of-government approach to global nutrition, using existing funding and reporting channels to enhance our collective impact on global nutrition outcomes. As I said, the plan was written by nutrition experts from 11 departments and agencies who worked collaboratively to produce the plan. And then there was a group of senior officials from each agency who oversaw its development and then led the final approval process within each agency. A very long process, as you can imagine. From the beginning, the senior officials and members of the technical writing group were very clear about what the plan was and what it was not. It was not a new initiative with new funding or new reporting channels. It was not a change in individual agency mandates or areas of work, but it was a means to coordinate nutrition actions using best practices and scientific evidence generated across agencies in both domestic and international programs to increase the impact of our work in global nutrition. The plan identifies opportunities to optimize our efforts in a coordinated way that integrates the importance of nutrition and food security into key aspects of health promotion, disease prevention and treatment, as well as in agriculture and food security. To implement the plan, the participating agencies have established a structure and process through sub-technical working groups that focus on a set of topics in which multiple agencies have shared interests. So the details may differ according to the particular issue, but the process to address nutrition-related problems is the same. First of all, generate data, translate those data to safe, effective interventions and programs, understand the context and the enabling environment that will affect rollout and scale-up, and collaborate with continuous learning through strong monitoring and evaluation. As stewards of American investments in nutrition through our various agencies, this plan enables effective coordination and promotes efficiencies by leveraging our diverse areas of expertise to enhance outcomes and impact. So what have we accomplished so far in even less than 1 year of implementation? We have successfully formed 8 sub-technical working groups that cover a breadth of nutrition topics that include food safety, food fortification, nutrition information systems, nutrition and infectious diseases, including HIV, nutrition and non-communicable diseases, the first 1,000 days, nutrition implementation science, and the global food security strategy. We've selected chairs for the technical working group and as well as leads for the sub-technical working groups. Groups have been meeting every month, every 6 weeks or so, and each group has developed a terms of reference and set milestones for the first year and some beyond that. Groups are implementing activities in support of actions that were outlined in the plan. So, for example, on June 12th, the first 1,000 days subgroup will host a webinar for U.S. government country offices on infant and young child feeding, best practices and examples, and we will be featuring some country examples as well as our own U.S. WIC program, Women, Infants, and Children. So this is a wonderful way to bring USAID work, some of our CDC work, as well as our WIC program together. In addition, we are actively working with individuals in U.S. government country offices to recommend how the plan can help improve how they organize and implement country-level programs. So, for example, in Uganda, we have a couple of other activities going on with USAID and CDC support. We're working with our country-level staff and the government of Uganda to strengthen nutrition information systems for routine surveillance and to identify micronutrient deficiencies to inform policies and policies around food fortification. And we're beginning to see some progress. With this plan, we're building on whole of government successes that we've seen in Feed the Future and starting to see through the Global Food Security Act. In 2015 alone, the U.S. government reached nearly 18 million children globally with effective nutrition interventions. In 2016, USAID helped 82 million women and children access essential health services. And in some Feed the Future countries, USAID has helped reduce poverty and malnutrition by up to 1/3. But while we're seeing successes, we also recognize the challenges and appreciate those that were highlighted in the CSIS report that's being launched today. One challenge noted is that the plan does not cover all of the global nutrition issues. For this plan, which was the first of its kind, we deliberately selected a core group of topics on which more than one agency has expertise and interest, with a focus on countries where more than one agency is operating. But we fully expect that the plan will evolve over time as we gain more experience and knowledge through these collaborations and as global nutrition evidence emerges from our ongoing research. The CSIS report also noted the challenge to implement a plan through largely voluntary efforts. And we understand those challenges very well. And we have noted the need to strengthen our formal structure and processes as we go forward. But my experience so far has been that we're already reaping the fruits of our labor. And being able to recognize success, even at this stage, just strengthens the foundation and gives us momentum to continue to build upon. So I want to thank you very much for allowing me to talk a little bit about this plan, which is maybe not available here today, but it's available at least on USAID's website. And I welcome you to download it, to read it, to follow our efforts, to give us constructive suggestions and help us to achieve our goal. And our overarching goal with this plan is to improve nutrition, to enhance health, productivity, and human potential. And I thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to the panel.
Thank you so much, Anne. You can bet that we're going to continue to follow the progress of the plan and the working groups and hopefully continue to celebrate the progress and the impact that you're making. So with our panel, we're going to expand this conversation a little bit more. So beyond the government's coordination plan on nutrition, we really want to look at how much is the U.S. government investing, what does that mean in terms of the budget negotiations that are happening, and why is nutrition important, what does implementation look like. So we have a great group of us, well, I guess all of us are great, but the great group of experts that are with us, really looking at from both the implementing partner side to the advocacy side, and then of course from the congressional side. So to start us off, we have Dr. Thomas Schetzel, and he's the Director of Nutrition at CARE. And he has, again, decades of experience in international public health and nutrition. What I really like about his background is that he works in both nutrition and agriculture. He has graduate degrees in agronomy as well as in applied nutrition. And his experience ranges from research to M&E to designing programs. So he really has a depth of experience from a technical perspective on nutrition. And after that, we're going to hear from Lucy Sullivan, who's the executive director of 1,000 Days. And if you're unfamiliar with 1,000 Days, please go to their website. They're a great advocacy organization that helps us better understand the importance of that period from inception to the first 2 years, and how during that time it is irreversible what happens in a child's life and how that can relate to economic growth. They're doing some great work there. And last, we have Ryan Evans, and Ryan works on the Hill as a legislative assistant for Senator Johnny Isakson, a Republican from Georgia. We have this Georgia contention, which wasn't quite planned on the stage, with Tom being based in Atlanta. Ryan works on foreign affairs in her job. She also has a graduate degree in international development, and I can tell you firsthand that she's not one of those Hill staffers that has never left Washington, D.C. She traveled with me to Senegal last summer for a congressional delegation that we took to look at Feed the Future programs in the field. So she has been to the field and been in rural areas and really understands how U.S. investments in agriculture and nutrition can make a difference. So we're going to start with Tom. Tom, from your perspective, especially as an implementing partner, what are some of the big areas or global trends that you're watching in terms of nutrition and that you think we should know?
Okay, thank you, Kimberly. And thanks to CSIS for this opportunity. I guess one big trend is integrated and multi-sectoral programming. We're talking about the coordination across sectors, and USAID has a multi-sectoral nutrition plan. At CARE, we find that nutrition is vital to all of our programs, whether it's nutrition or not, and that the nutrition-specific sort of interventions are more effective when they're coupled with some nutrition-sensitive ones that sort of can, provide the resources that help people adopt the practices that are so important for the nutrition-specific. In terms of programming, though, that can become a challenge. What we find is that it's often difficult to work across ministries at the community level and to get focus on nutrition. Thanks to organizations like 1,000 Days and the Sun Movement, most countries now really have pretty good nutrition policies and strategies for implementing them, but the difficulty is implementing on the ground. The implementation isn't quite so pretty as the policies themselves are. Actually, it's really encouraging to think about something like the Global Coordination Plan, because it represents this whole of government approach, and that's really what we're trying to achieve at the community level, is to work with different sectors and get a whole of government focus on nutrition at the community level, just as sort of ministries have signed off at the central level. Another trend actually really came out in your report. You talked about decades. I've been doing nutrition programs since I still had all my hair, and I've never seen a moment like this. We've decided, we've got consensus that what we want to address is stunting. It's like a proxy for well-being or for adult productivity or educational attainment. We've had the Lancet series that have helped us to get consensus on what to do and who to do it with. We had, the policies that I mentioned. And actually, in my experience, you said that I had a background in agriculture. I think that Feed the Future really changed the conversation about agriculture and nutrition. And that really people in agriculture are thinking about the fact that we need to do more than just increase incomes or just produce more biomass. Agriculture needs to, it's about food, it needs to produce better nutrition. I've not experienced a moment like this with all this momentum, and so I can't resist, because if we're going to talk about budgets and the like, it would, from our side at CARE, it would be tragic to take our foot off the pedal now, when so many things and all this momentum over so many years has got us to this point. We're about to maybe be able to make some serious impact, and it would be a tragedy. While I've got the microphone, though, I'd like to add one more thing about the Global Coordination Plan. At CARE, we like to say that gender is non-negotiable in every single program we have, whether it's nutrition or elsewhere. So I went to the Global Coordination Report looking to see where gender fits in, and I found one mention in the document. Our biggest success in nutrition programming came with a DFAP in Bangladesh called Shahardo. And Shahardo was able to reduce stunting by a little over 2% a year for 5 years, against a background of 0.6% reduction a year. And we really dug into the data on what caused this, and by far the biggest factor was women's empowerment. So I guess my plug would be that as this global coordination plan rolls out, to please give priority to nutrition, things like women's time, women's decision-making, women's time poverty. This is really the key to having success with the technical interventions. That's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you, Tom. I really liked your point about how implementation isn't as pretty as policies. You can have great plans on paper, but it's a very different story of how that's actually implemented in the field and in the community. Lucy.
Great. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, CSIS and Kimberly, for this wonderful invitation to be here with you all. And thanks to everyone who's watching online. I'm so glad to be here. I don't need to tell anyone in the audience or hopefully watching how important the first 1,000 days are, but I do want to talk about how important investments in nutrition are. They're irrevocable. They last a lifetime, and they are the foundation for all other development investments. And we know that the cost of inaction is immense. Half of all deaths of children under the age of 5 are due to malnutrition. And then a quarter of the kids around the world under the age 5 are stunted. And we know that that means that they don't grow to their full potential. Their bodies don't grow to their full potential. Their brains, most importantly, don't grow to their full potential. And I think that's sort of when you talk about trends, thinking about the importance of nutrition to brain development and just what we're learning around that is really powerful. Because when a child is stunted, it means that before they enter the classroom door, they're already at a major disadvantage for learning and skills and future earnings and the ability to provide for themselves and their family. So we know that investments in nutrition not only help children reach their full potential, it leads to less poverty later in life and overall economic growth, and I'll get into that in a second. But I'm really struck by the narrative recently around the investments in nutrition as being investments in gray matter infrastructure, and the person who I think coined that term was Akina Adesina, the president of the African Development Bank. And others have really latched on to that. So the president of the World Bank, Jim Kim, at a recent event, talked about how in today's digital economy, we need a workforce that has brain power, that has well-developed brains, strong executive function. Creativity is really important, especially as jobs move to automation. So how do we expect employers to invest in a country when their workforce is not sufficiently developed physically, cognitively? So governments that aren't investing in nutrition, they're not investing in their workforce, and they're really harming their future prospects in this sort of global economy, which will increasingly be more and more of a knowledge economy. We know that we can't continue on this path, so we know we have to change things, and the best place to start, in addition to having fantastic policies and fantastic programs, is having the money to actually fund the work and the interventions. Kimberly, you mentioned the 1% of ODA is spent on basic nutrition. That is unfortunately a shocking statistic, but just half of 1% of health budgets in countries with high burdens of malnutrition are spent on nutrition-specific interventions. So also extremely low levels of investment from countries themselves. So we have to change this paradigm. And we know this isn't just about very poor countries. It's also about middle-income countries. So countries that have high stunting rates, middle-income countries like Indonesia, Guatemala, Nigeria, India. And that's where we need more leadership at country level, of course, to step up and mobilize domestic resource mobilization. I got an applause for that. So what's the game plan? So number one, we have targets, right? So in 2012, the World Health Assembly put out 6 global nutrition targets, and it was really the first time ever that we had something to aim for. So, 40% reduction of stunting in children under 5, reductions in maternal anemia. So you want to talk about gender, let's talk about anemia. Increases to exclusive breastfeeding, reductions in wasting, reductions in low birth weight, and then reductions in overweight. And so what we did as an advocacy organization, we said, great, we've got these targets, now how do we reach them? So we need a game plan and we need a financing roadmap. So we work with the World Bank and Results for Development to really put together this financing roadmap, what we call the investment framework for at least 4 of the 6 targets. And what we found, and this was launched last year, that the world needs to increase its investment by $7 billion a year to scale up nutrition-specific interventions. So that might seem like a lot of money, $7 billion a year for the next 10 years. When you consider that the world spends $485 billion on fossil fuel subsidies, that's really pennies. So that's in fossil fuel subsidies, $1.3 billion a day on something that will not get us any closer to more prosperous economies or ending poverty. So while this price tag seems large, we know that the benefits are incredibly powerful. So that was one of the things with this financing roadmap that we wanted to do. Not only how much is it going to cost, where's the money going to come from, and what's it going to buy us. So we know that for this amount of money that there could be economic benefits of about $420 billion. And that is incredibly powerful. In fact, recent estimates in African countries and in Asian countries that invest in nutrition, the estimates are that $83 billion can be added to their economies just by reaching the target for stunting. So these are big numbers, right? And because this is a big problem, but that's how powerful investing in nutrition are. On the human side of it, an investment of $7 billion per year can save almost 4 million lives. And we can see 65 million fewer children stunted. So a big reduction in stunting. The key is that we have to start now. We have to spur action now so that we don't have a next lost generation of children full of really stunted potential. So the money is going to come from a variety of sources. So we know that it can't just be all about donors. We know that domestic resource mobilization is incredibly important. We know that households themselves can spend more on nutritious foods and the like, and services and the like. So we believe that progress is possible, that even in this very constrained ODA environment, that we have to push for more funding. The donor investment to catalyze progress, to at least start getting things going, rests about $1.2 billion a year, which all of a sudden, when you break down that big $7 billion number into let's focus on the highest impact interventions, what we know we can scale now, that and what donors need to pay for, that number all of a sudden becomes a lot more manageable. So what does this mean for the U.S. government, right? So in the analysis, when we break that out and when we look at sort of the share that the U.S. government, can contribute, that means really an additional $380 million a year. Again, it sounds like a really big number in the context of where we are and in this budget climate. But think about the impact that can have. That can have an impact of 400,000 lives of children saved and 2.8 million fewer stunted children. And yes, this level of investment is ambitious, but it's not unprecedented. Thanks to champions in Congress, quite frankly, and bipartisan champions in Congress, we've seen an increase to the nutrition sub-account within the global health programs. So when we started looking at it in 2010, when that account was pulled out, it was about $75 million. And slowly but surely, thanks to Republican champions like Senator Isakson and others, we've seen that grow to $125 million. So we're still a ways away from where we want to be, where we need to be in terms of an investment level from the U.S. government. But I'm encouraged, certainly by the work that USAID has done, the interagency has done with this whole of government coordination plan, with the support that we've gotten from Republican champions. And you know what? For not a lot of money, the U.S. government can have a lot of impact on this problem. This is a terrific opportunity. You want to talk about a business opportunity for the Trump administration, the art of the deal? Nutrition. Nutrition for not a lot of money, you can get a lot in return. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much. Ryan, help us look at this through a congressional lens. So how do you look at nutrition in terms of foreign policy, and what's the role of Congress in terms of future funding?
Really great question, and thank you, Kimberly, for inviting me to be a part of this very distinguished panel. It's a little intimidating, I'm not going to lie, but also thanks to CSIS for hosting this. How do we make the decision to invest in nutrition? It's I don't know how to answer that discreetly. I mean, I think one of the things that Senator Isaacson thinks about when he looks at development as a whole is you have to look at it from many different perspectives. It is part of our national security interests. It is part of our economic interests. 95% of the world's markets are outside of the United States. And so we need to look further afield to find out where we can find places for our products and our ideas. And so those two things go together, but you can't do a lot of those investments you can't have those from the private sector if you don't have healthy, educated, productive workforces, as Lucy so eloquently illustrated for us. So in Congress, how do we come to these decisions? Well, it takes a lot of input from implementers, from administrations, and from advocates to really help educate us and understand the issues on the ground as we try to figure out legislative agendas, as well as perform oversight over these programs as well. So one of the key touch point here for me has been working on the Global Food Security Act, which we finally got across the finish line last Congress. It took 9 years, I think, to do that. But part and parcel of that was really trying to get nutrition as a key foundational element of that bill, and we were successful in doing that. And so now it comes to us to really look at that return on investment, go back and verify the results that folks are bringing to us, and go see it in the field, as I got to do last summer, and so and as my boss has done in previous trips. So, there are a whole bunch of factors that go into how do we make these decisions, and one of those things is the president's budget request, and it is always a request, and Congress at the end of the day does have the power of the purse, and we'll take a look at all of that, and there are some things that from our perspective are good things in that budget. There are other things that we think we need to be well targeted, that really do fit in with our national security interests, and we're going to have a robust debate about that, I think. We're in our appropriations process right now, taking input from groups like CARE in 1,000 Days and so many other groups, and really getting an understanding of where people are on these issues, not just from these groups, but from our constituents too. There's a lot of input that comes from our home states, either for or against particular funding, and so we're going to take all of that into consideration. I think it'll be an interesting process moving forward. I can't predict what it will look like. I've gotten out of that business, and just trying to see where we go from here. But I think at the end of the day, we'll look at the evidence. We'll see where it takes us, and there are advocates in Congress on these issues. And I work with many of them. So, yeah.
One question I have for you, Ryan, since you brought up constituents, is, there is a lot of support on the Hill. We say this often, but we really mean it in terms of bipartisan support. She mentioned the Global Food Security Act. All of you in the room kind of nodding your head. I'm assuming you know what that's about. And we'd be in a very different place today if that hadn't passed last summer. So I want to hear a little bit more about constituents because, let's talk about America first, right? I mean, that is what our president would like to do. And so why should Americans care about what's happening in other places? Why should Americans care about using their tax dollars to help someone in another country? You know, what is your boss, who is a great champion on this, what does he say to those constituents?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and he always reminds people that our international affairs funding is 1%, if not a little bit less than that, of our overall spending. And it helps us in so many different ways. So if you're investing in places, whether it's through economic growth and development opportunities or good governance, rule of law issues, or through health and education programming, what you're doing is you're creating an enabling environment for stable societies, hopefully bringing peace to those areas. And that's a benefit for us. It means that we're not spending that money on defense spending. We're looking to open up markets for American workers so that their products can go places. It has a strong return on investment. It is part of our overall strategy when it comes to national security and economic interests. And I think a lot of people are sometimes surprised to find out that international affairs funding is such a small piece of the pie, and that I think we have to do more to talk about that. But I don't know if that answers your question, but that's usually where we are. But we have very engaged constituency on a lot of these issues, for sure.
Fantastic. So, both domestically and internationally, this White House budget announced yesterday proposes some pretty dramatic and dangerous cuts to nutrition across the board. So, Lucy, you mentioned some numbers, and so the FY18 request for budget, again, it's a request, is $79 million, and that's 37% lower than this year's budget. And you put that in a great perspective of how that's really pennies on the dollar. I mean, I know USAID projects that are well more than $79 million. And so to think about that for all of global nutrition is difficult. So Lucy, you gave a lot of great arguments of why we should invest more, and you've looked into this for a long time. But, if you had 2 minutes in a room with someone from the Trump administration, or also policymakers on the Hill they're going to be going through these negotiation battles, what are the key messages when you don't have a lot of time that you could tell people in the audience who do that similar work of why $79 million is not enough?
So the return on investments of nutrition is among the highest in any development category. So I think I would definitely start there. The U.S. government can make a big impact for not a lot of money. I think this is an opportunity. This is a legacy opportunity for someone in the administration, in this administration, to take this on and really say, you know what, I'm going to champion this, because for too long this has been a neglected issue. We have been underinvesting. So I think that, appealing to that sense of wanting to leave an impact, to make your mark. The other thing is that, we've got partners that are willing to step up. We've got countries that are willing to step up. There's, over 59, I think it's maybe even over 60 countries now in the SUN movement, in the Scaling Up Nutrition movement. These countries have decided to make nutrition a priority themselves, and they know they have to invest more. We have the World Bank, we have the African Development Bank, we have other donors that are also willing to step up. But the U.S. needs to lead. The U.S. needs to lead because that's what it does so well. And when the U.S. leads, the world tends to follow. And so this is also a leadership opportunity for the Trump administration, for policymakers.
Tom, Bill Gates in his annual letter focused a lot on nutrition. And he said that nutrition is one of the biggest missed opportunities in global health. Do you agree? And if so, why?
Well, yeah, I agree. Well, there's many ways to answer that, but one that immediately comes to my mind is that we have so many contacts with these kids, and we're not trying to do anything about nutrition. We're trying to do something about malaria. We're trying to do something about pneumonia, but actually during that same contact, we could be working with the mom about how do you feed this kid. and what's wrong and what should you be looking for, and all these opportunities that we lose, even when we get to treatment approaches for malnutrition, which, as we heard earlier, with this high risk of death, it's a necessary thing, but actually we can also work with the mom to help her understand how to keep this from happening again. Instead of sort of treating and treating and treating, we can treat and help that child never to need treating a second time. I think one more that I'd add, if you'll give me the time, is that it's the amount of money. The nutrition budgets, as we heard, are so small in comparison to health budgets, and yet, as you look at child survival, malnutrition is responsible for such a high percentage of child death. Things are sort of inverted in terms of what the need is and what the expenditures are.
Yeah, we call it the 45-1% conundrum. 45% deaths, but yet 1% of funding goes to nutrition and dealing with the mortality, the high mortality that malnutrition brings about.
There's, if you follow the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition has a great analysis on the budget that's come out. So if this topic interests you, which I assume it does because you're here today with us, I highly suggest you look at this. There's a great, on page 15, it's full analysis, the global health funding. It has a really simple table for those of us that aren't deeply steeped in budgets or global health like myself. But you see, for example, in FY18, we spent $4.32 billion in PEPFAR in our HIV/AIDS programs. And I am not saying that's not important, but $4.32 billion. But it also goes through to talk about how much we spend on malaria and tuberculosis and, again, nutrition, $125 million. And that's after a lot of work and support to even get it up to that. So it's quite interesting. I want to turn to the audience because we have a lot of experts in the room. And I know that we have from students to people who've worked on the Hill on this. And I'd really like to see what your thoughts are on this as well as what questions you have for our panelists. So please raise your hand if you have a question. We'll have the microphones come around. I'll ask that you please state your name and your organization so that our live webcast also knows who's speaking. We have one right here in the front that we can go ahead and bring the microphone up to. And you can address your question to someone specifically on the panel or broadly, and we'll take 3 at a time. Go ahead.
Good morning, or afternoon rather. My name is Diana Cayley. I'm an advisor of food security and monitoring, evaluation, and learning at Crown Agents USA. I did my doctoral dissertation research in Uganda, where, as we mentioned before, thank you, that there's a great nutrition plan there, but the big problem that I saw in my research with IFPRI, the International Food Policy Research Institute, I was working at urban slums there, and no one there had seen anything that was implemented from the nutrition plan. So I appreciate that Thomas brought this up. So my question to the panelists is, where are our best and most strategic points of entry to turn well-written and well-thought-out policy into action, given that we're constrained by, like we said, potentially by the budget, in light of the new coordination plan? Sort of how do we find those points of entry? Thank you.
Excellent. Other questions? Yeah, Emmy.
Hi, Emmy Simmons from the Global Panel on Agriculture and Food Systems for Nutrition. And my question is sort of lauding all of you for saying, yes, the momentum is there now, and now is the time to capitalize on it. But perhaps pushing a little bit more, not just on stunting, not just on undernutrition, but what I see as a much more global problem of malnutrition, which includes overweight and obesity, in which the US is quite a leader, and as well as micronutrient malnutrition, which you mentioned very briefly, Lucy. But I would like to just push this toward the political question then. Do we in the US actually have interests, human health interests, that coincide with those of partners in the developing world? Not just on stunting, but on using nutrition as a mechanism for actually developing that gray matter infrastructure, but for developing the capacity of children to really perform in what is going to be a very challenging 21st century economy.
Great question. In the back?
So I'm Rajal Pandya-Loach with IFPRI, and I have a comment, question. I just returned last night from India, where I moderated a session on nutrition at the African Development Bank's annual meeting. And that was an incredible session for the African Development Bank to have a session on nutrition, 5 ministers of finance or budget or planning, made unplanned interventions from the floor, talking about their commitments or their interest or how some of the issues they face. So a question a question for the panel as well as for Anne, if she's willing to answer, would be how do we change the game so that we're bringing the finance people on board? And this is partly Lucy's question. What will entice them? Because they see a different picture than we see from the nutrition side. And how do we build that critical mass up of people in the finance and the planning sectors to put in the investment over the longer term? And when Anne mentioned the whole of government approach and what it took to do that here, I wonder whether we can explore a whole of government approach in several of these key countries, and what would it take to get to that whole of government approach, not just the finance, not just the orphan nutrition sort of policy people, but kind of getting to whole of government approach. Are there lessons from the US to learn for that approach? Thank you.
Excellent, excellent questions. Thank you so much. Tom, let's start with you. There were a couple there that you could answer.
Well, I'll go to that first one and share some of our experience. What we've had some good results with is working at lower administrative levels and playing a convening role where we bring representatives from several sectors, maybe from private sector, and have monthly planning meetings that are sort of cross-sectoral, so that then everybody goes back out and implements sort of in their own world. But they all have in mind this collective thing that we're trying to do for nutrition in that area. We've had some success with that, and we're trying to replicate that. I don't know if others have suggestions.
Yeah, not on that first question. I have to think about that. It was an excellent question, so I'm going to have to think about that one a little bit more. Emmy, thank you for your question. Sort of the multiple forms of malnutrition and how we think about that and what the U.S. government perspective is, I think is something that we have to start really tackling seriously. Diet, what we eat, is the number one cause of premature death around the world, right? Not just in developed countries, all over the world. Chronic diseases are on the rise in developing countries. I mean, massively on the rise. And whether you're talking about overweight, obesity, diet-related chronic diseases, undernutrition, micronutrient malnutrition, what all those have in common, when you look for the common denominator, it's a diet that really fails to give us the nutrition that we need to be healthy. Lessons learned in terms of the U.S., in terms of its unfortunate leadership on overweight, obesity. We started taking a look at this problem here in the U.S. 1,000 days, and from our perspective, the evidence is there that you focus on the first 1,000 days if you want to prevent some of the problems that we're seeing, in an adolescence here, in adults in terms of overweight, obesity, and type 2 diabetes, et cetera, et cetera. It's interesting because we don't take micronutrient malnutrition seriously enough here in the U.S. About a quarter of infants 1 year of age are actually deficient in iron. So it's pretty serious here, and given that we have high levels of food insecurity here, so I think there's some learning that we can probably share around what to do. Learning from other countries into the U.S. On Rajul's terrific question, how do we get this into finance ministers? Believe me, we are trying. I think that we have a rock-solid economic case. I think positioning this as an investment in how you in a future economy, and how you build the workforce for the future. Talking about this in terms of stunting is a constraint, and malnutrition writ large, and even diet-related chronic diseases, a constraint to economic growth. And a few countries, of course, have realized that. And you have to look at this, we talk about infrastructure, and in the president's budget, of course, there's a big push for infrastructure spending. Investing in children's nutrition is infrastructure spending. It's a different kind of infrastructure, and the payoff is a lot further down the road, but I think that's the kind of language and the kind of narrative we need to start pushing on.
And as you mentioned earlier, Lucy, that's the kind of narrative that we see the World Bank president using, and so I think that can also be a way to get finance people engaged, so that you have someone like in that kind of leadership role that's pushing this to that degree, which is fantastic. Tom, is there any other points that you wanted to make in the sense of on the ground in terms of engaging finance ministers, or also with the points of working with local governments and the consideration, which I think is a really interesting point of trying to help their whole of government process?
I don't really have any answers, but I have some thoughts. There's a lot that we can do, but I think that we need to find champions in these countries that are the ones who make these arguments and do this convincing. And so maybe our job is to really do a good job of searching for those champions who are ready to take that leadership and to bring their own government and their own leaders to this discussion.
Turn back to the audience. Other questions? Yes, in the back there.
Good afternoon, everybody. Larry Schaefer with Schaefer Global Management and Fresh Community Holdings Corporation. Where we approach this issue is from production. So how do we define, working with all of the think tanks and all of these influencers, how can we define this catchphrase everybody's throwing around, sustainable agriculture? Can we truly actually come up with some best practices, some business industry standards? My largest concern is that America is going to export its version of agriculture, big ag, to Africa, to some of these developing countries that don't know any better. Because the country leaders are going to see the big dollars that the lobbyists and other people that are supporting these big industry people come their way, sort of like, I don't know if anybody's supportive of China, but sort of like China has done in some of these places. That's the largest scare I have. So if we can define what sustainable agriculture is, so it is not reliant on any fossil fuels usage, it's not reliant on any chemical usage, it's not reliant on potentially vulnerability to climate change. If we can provide that structure in defining sustainable agriculture to help influence the policymakers in the decisions they make of where the funds go and what programs the funds support, it would be outstanding.
Thank you so much. Yes, Dan, go ahead. Speak loudly. We have a party happening next door.
Hi, my name is Dan Silverstein. I'm a private sector and capital markets strategic
Please stand up, Dan, just for the live webcast. Thanks.
Stand up?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, sorry. A private sector advisor. I'm also a member of the Friedman School's Tough Nutrition Council. And so we talk about these issues all the time. And one of the areas that is that I'm missing a piece. And it's what you were talking about, and it has to do with the funding part. It seems to me when you talk about global health getting so much funding and nutrition getting none, what you're telling me is that what I think is political will is the derivative that goes into the funding. For some reason, the policymakers find themselves gravitating towards funding what serves the needs of themselves or their constituents. And somehow the nutrition story doesn't get told with the same articulation. David Lambert used to say that nutrition doesn't have a home. Agriculture has a home and health has a home, but nutrition doesn't have a home. And I know he would be really excited to hear this conversation and to talk about how you create the political will that finds its way through the public policy system and that comes out the other end as a budgetary allocation. So the question is, do you have insights into that? Am I right or wrong?
Thank you so much. Other questions? Let's go to Ellen right up here. Because I know you have a question, something related to the Hill, right, Ellen?
No, not at all, actually, but that's interesting. Hi, Ellen Levinson. I'm a consultant, and I've worked in agriculture, food security for a long time. But one of my questions, and I mean a thought question, is, really, if we think about our food supply globally, 1,000 days is a very focused area, and you have some measurements. There are measurements in the Sustainable Development Goals, but and non-communicable diseases we were talking about, and the impact of nutrition on it. But really, where is the money? The money is in the food industry. And the food industry listens to consumers, and they are really changing. And I think nobody's giving that credit here. And really, I think I see a nexus of change coming when they adopt standards and benchmarks in order to identify how they can move forward to meet, like here, you hear a lot, and a lot of the companies are, lowering sugar and fat and salt in their food, in their products. They're trying to come up with more nutritious. They're listening to the consumer, and they're listening to the global dialogue. But I think that they also need to find their benchmarks, just like we all do, and that is always the challenge with nutrition. I mean, I happen to have a master's in nutrition. Most people don't even know that about me because I've done so many other things. But the interesting thing is, it's hard to just put your finger on one dot there. So I think that this movement, and Sun is part of it, and the Business Network part, and the World Bank's, also working on sustainability, including in nutrition. I think those issues, we really have to look at the business side. That's where it's going to happen the most across the globe. And not only, it's what they're going to do with their portfolios, and how, when they are building out in developing countries, or when the food industries are starting there, where they go. Should it just be snack foods that are, nutritionally not dense at all, but, calorically dense and have the wrong things in them, or not? I mean, so there is an opportunity. But then that clashes against what we have here in the United States, which is, what do we call it? The nanny government, you know what I mean? Like, government telling you what to eat and what not to eat. There's also that backlash, don't tell me what to eat. So I think it's a sensitive issue when we talk about nutrition, because it's such an independent issue, it's my choice. So we have a mix of issues there, but I think bottom line is, industry and the food industry is very interested in how they can improve their portfolios to meet today's consumer demands, and also acknowledging and going in the direction of the fact that we have to improve nutrition and the double burden of nutrition. So I just like to throw that out because it hasn't come up. Thanks.
Fantastic. Really great questions and comments. Thank you so much. Who wants to begin? There's a lot to unpack there. Tom, there was a lot of agriculture there. What do you think?
I don't think I can define sustainable agriculture, but I maybe will add to your definition. Maybe we also want to think about that it's sustainable in the sense that it doesn't increase women's work and labor burden. Maybe it's sustainable in the sense that it provides the nutrients that people need to stay healthy, and not just more production. One thing, you talked about your fears. I think one way to avoid that is to keep a focus on the smallholder farmer. Large-scale commercialization is always going to go a certain direction wherever you go, just about. But the smallholder farmer has particular needs and a particular context that they have to sort of produce and survive in. And so agriculture that's appropriate for that male or female smallholder farmer is going to look very different than this exporting, you said, of the American idea of sustainable agriculture.
For me, when I think of sustainable ag, I think of, the 3 Ps, people, planet, and profit. And right now, one of those Ps is very high in terms of the profit, people, and planet, sort of taking a back seat. Obviously, 1,000 Days, we very much focus on the people side of it. But, it brings up for me the question of dietary diversity, which is incredibly important. And we know that this is something that, in a lot of developing parts of the world, people eat a very monotonous diet, and that is not good for their nutrition. It is not good for their health. So how do we, step that up and integrate sort of the ag nutrition linkages that everyone, talks about? For me, that's where the two things meet. Thank you for invoking David Lambert. So I'm a huge fan, and I can't, I don't, other than to share another David Lambert story, when we met, and he said, 1,000 Days, it's such a brilliant concept. And he said, on the steps of Capitol Hill, there needs to be a statue of a child and the word irreversible engraved on it. And that should be the daily reminder to members of Congress, to policymakers, really not just here in the US, everywhere, what's at stake when you don't invest in nutrition.
I guess you set that up pretty well. Well, I mean, to the question about political will and why does nutrition not seem to have as much attention as other issues, part of that has to do with congressional authorizations. PEPFAR has been authorized a number of times by Congress, and if you have that leads to funding, and everything else, it becomes kind of discretionary at that point and can be moved around. The other problem, and maybe it's not a problem, but the other thing with nutrition is where does it live? I mean, is it a global health issue? Is it a ag issue? Is it, whatever issue? It cuts across so many areas, and it is that very foundational element that how do you find a place for it to live? And I think we have to be kind of innovative in our thinking as policymakers when we're talking about these issues and trying to find a way to do things like CARE has done and put that lens on it. It's one of the reasons why, like I said before, the Global Food Security Act had nutrition as part of all of it, had smallholder agriculture as its focus, as well as putting a gender lens on issues as well. So that you can look at these cross-sectoral issues through many different lenses. So I think that might be a part of the reason why the political will seems to not be there. It's hard to make that very kind of discrete, well, that's a nutrition issue. And, I think maybe that's the answer to that question.
On the issues of the political will and a home for nutrition, it's like a perennial problem. Where is the home for nutrition? If you put it in health, then it has no influence on agriculture. You put it in agriculture, it has no influence on health. So many countries try to solve this by making it a cabinet level. Pardon me? Will this help? Every little bit helps. I don't mean to call the report a little bit, sorry. But you put it at, say, the cabinet level, it has no line authority. So it's always being shifted around. I don't have a solution, but that is part of the problem. Then as far as political will in countries, when we talk about countries that have 40 to 50% stunting, malnutrition is not a visible problem. It's not something that comes on people's agenda because you drive around, you don't notice it. But at the same time, malnutrition isn't, especially stunting, it's not something that you come in and cure. So you see some dramatic change that you can hold a policymaker accountable for, like it's not getting better, you come in and do something. You prevent it and it takes a long time. So these are the challenges at trying to keep that interest in political will high. I think he's searching for a microphone.
I just want to say that Rajul was what gave me the impetus to ask the question. I was thinking about it, but if African leaders are standing up, if you're at a conference at the African Development Bank and they're standing up unprompted and offering this, are we getting towards that area where they can see the unseen stunting and the need for nutrition?
Well, just look at what we've mentioned, the 60 countries. There's never been anything like this. Everybody is sort of on the same page and focused on the same issues. And there's an awareness that I think is a unique moment, which is why we can't let up.
Can I come in for a moment? Sure. I agree very much with Tom. It is a unique moment, and it is a small set of countries that needs to grow. But more importantly is within these countries where you begin to see that attention of the finance or planning or budget. How do we grow that attention? That comes back to the question for Anne, the all-of-government approach. Because in a sense, if you cannot mobilize larger groups of people and make it an issue for across the country and across political spectrums, it will remain divided and small. So that is my question, how do we find a way to grow that political will where it reaches a threshold or a critical mass? You see it in some countries. You see it in Bangladesh today, which as a country is making significant investments. What do we learn and how do we do it? Is it issues of capacity? In that case, we also need to make those investments in capacity, but it go beyond advocacy.
Absolutely agree. Okay, let's take a round of new questions. Right here in the middle, yeah. Please
Hi,
stand up. Thank
good
you.
afternoon. I'm Amy Johnson. I'm an independent consultant working primarily on social justice issues, but I'm also finishing up a certificate in nutrition programming through Tufts. My question is, I'm going to maybe try to shift the perspective a little bit, because I think that we've been talking about momentum as an opportunity, but I'm really interested in zooming in a little bit further on that and hearing from the panelists, and Kimberly, I would include you in this as well, whether there's a specific beacon of hope and somewhere where we can stick our foot in the door so that we don't lose the momentum and it doesn't shut completely. Where is it that we can really capitalize and make sure that there's a concerted effort or perhaps a group mobilization to ensure that the momentum continues?
Excellent. Other questions? Yes, right here.
Hi, I'm Jenny Lane. I'm a Leland Fellow and an Animal Health and Livelihoods Technical Advisor at Land O'Lakes International Development. And my question is for Anne. Hopefully, is she allowed to answer a question?
Unfortunately, no.
Oh.
You can ask your question and we can see what the panelists have to say that might be related to it.
Oh, okay. Well, it builds off of Tom's comment on how difficult it is to kind of implement these multi-sectoral programs on the ground. And my question was to Anne, with her seeing kind of the process over the last 3 years of trying to have this kind of whole of government coordination plan to try to work on nutrition issues. That's really what we need on the ground in a lot of these other countries. So what were kind of 2 or 3 kind of good lessons that she has that she could recommend when we go into the field and try to work on this integration? We can say, well, we've done it here. This is how hard it was, but this is what we learned. Thank you.
Let's get Anne a microphone.
I'm not going to try and answer that. I think there are a lot of issues that need to be discussed around that. A lot of great experience. Tom, you've got experience. Rajul, love to pick up on that. I think that's another topic. But I think just in general, it's got to be addressed at every level. You've got to have the high-level champions. You've got to have the technical people who understand the multi-sectoral nature of things. And I think you've got to have ordinary people, communities, mothers, fathers, grandmothers, recognizing that there's a problem. And I think if we work on that as a very holistic thing, and I think we have some good examples in some countries like Nepal, where I've worked, where local governments understand the issue, communities are rallying around it. It doesn't work in Kathmandu so well, maybe, but it works in the districts a little bit better, where things are smaller, more manageable. People are neighbors; they know each other. I think another way to get people understanding and aware is something that we have used very successfully at USAID is the profiles, where you start to generate the political will by understanding what is the economic impact of malnutrition in all its forms on this country. And you feed the data into a model. You show ministers of finance and Ministry of Finance personnel. You show the agriculture team. You show the health team. And the Prime Minister and all the leaders start to rally around and truly understand what is the value of investing in nutrition and what is the impact that we can see by actually putting our money toward that. Bangladesh is a good example of where that has worked as well. So I see another panel coming. I mean, this panel is excellent. I want to hear more questions for them.
Thank you so much. Let's take one right here in the front. That was a smooth transition, Anne.
I was about to fall on the stage. Hi, I'm Angela Canterbury with the Volunteers for Economic Growth Alliance, or VEGA, and we're a consortium of 29 NGOs, including Land O'Lakes. We do a range of economic growth and prosperity building, but we have 3 Feed the Future programs, one of which is coming online with a private sector partner on nutrition. We also have some farmer-to-farmer programs, and I have a question for Ryan, because she and her boss have been just phenomenal champions for how to mobilize and partner with highly skilled Americans to infuse that sort of expertise and partnership with local partners around the globe. Also, creating a political constituency, by the way, as we do this. Also, leaders in private sector partnerships, and how do you leverage the interest that corporations have in meeting the SDGs, for example, to get more US involvement, because then therefore there's more economic opportunity all around.
Excellent. Let's take one more question and then we'll wrap it up. Asma in the back.
Thank you, and thanks for excellent remarks. You know, Anne mentioned technical expertise, and over the last several years, as the U.S. government has been responding to the Sun movement and really scaling up its own work on nutrition, and with the coordination plan and the multi-sectoral plan at AID, one of the risks in this current budget environment is the risk of losing that technical expertise at USAID on these issues. I'd love the panel to just reflect a little bit on the impact that that would have on the programs that are currently underway.
Very good question. Anybody want to jump in or start? Why don't we start down at the end, Ryan, since one question was specific to you, and then we'll come all the way up. And I would ask each of you, since we're nearing the 6 or 7 minute remark, that you also include your response to the question in regards to the beacon of hope. Let's find some positivity in the midst of this budget week, or things that you're holding on to. Ryan, go ahead.
Well, to Angela's question, how do you mobilize the private sector and volunteers to be involved in it? And I think it's awareness at all sorts of different levels, whether that's through your political leaders in a particular place, or or in your local communities, and just trying to figure out if it's through your corporate social responsibility, even some of those issues. I know my boss has. I should have said this earlier, but he's also co-chair of the Caucus for Effective Foreign Assistance, which really is looking for innovative ways to engage the private sector with the public sector, and trying to find ways to make our dollars go further, because we do have to deal with very real financial constraints that that are coming down the pike, and have been around, frankly, for a few years too. So it's one of those things where I think a lot of it has to do with just awareness and knowing what's out there and what you can do in these places. And then to kind of wrap it up with the beacon of hope kind of thing, I think a lot of what I have enjoyed most about my job is being able to go to the field and see, firsthand experience of what we're actually doing on the ground. And I've gotten to see activities, maternal child health programming in Burundi. I've gotten to see Feed the Future programming in Senegal. I've been to several different places to see the effects that we're having. And frankly, I've traveled to other developed countries that were former recipients of U.S. foreign assistance, and know what can be down the line there. And I think that's something that I think about and try to make the case for. I know my boss thinks that sub-Saharan Africa is a place that we should be focusing on, that there is great potential there for so many different reasons. And so I think that's what I hold on to, is we've seen the work, we've seen the results, and I think Senegal was a great example. We saw everything from the smallest share, the small farm where I think 50 women all worked in this one communal garden, and they were so proud of what they were able to do, and they worked with Heifer International to have goats and even cattle to help supplement their kids' diets. And then all the way up to, pretty scaled up commercial enterprise too. And how do you move from that and progress on to something that is more scalable, could be good for export. So I think I'm kind of rambling, and I apologize for that. But I think it's one of those things where it's helpful for policymakers to see the effects of the money that we're spending. And I think, through our work with the caucus, through my boss's work on the Foreign Relations Committee, and through, other avenues, we've seen that. And I think there are a lot of members who are informed on a lot of these issues due to a lot of their firsthand experiences. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, that's great perspective. So starting with the sort of more, sort of depressing question, perhaps, in terms of what might be at stake. I think we all know what will be at stake if big drastic cuts are made to the foreign affairs budget. It will not make America safer, that's for sure. And it will, I think American taxpayers honestly deserve a budget that reflects American values, that does put America first in the sense of America exhibiting its leadership in the world. We have to, I think you said it brilliantly, we cannot afford to take our foot off the gas. We can't afford to undo the progress that we've made on global development. The beacons of hope are countries like Senegal, they're countries like Peru that have really reduced stunting in a short amount of time, a relatively short amount of time. And a lot of that was sort of, high-level political commitment, but also, just the hard work of in the trenches of breaking down those silos and thinking multi-sectorally and across ministries, and programming that way and programming the dollars that way. From our standpoint, we have been saying for a long time we need more money for nutrition and more nutrition for the money. So in these budget-constrained environment, how can all the foreign assistance investments that we make as a country, how can they work harder to prevent stunting, to prevent anemia? We didn't talk enough about anemia, I don't think. To prevent all these conditions that really hold people back, hold families back, hold countries back. The beacon of hope. Well, the first 1,000 days, young children, expectant mothers, that is in and of itself a beacon of hope. But as advocates, we look to the big key moments. We look to the moments in time where we can, provide a platform for policymakers to make new commitments, for financial pledges to be made. And I think for us, we're looking right now at the World Bank. We have tremendous leadership in Jim Kim, the president of the World Bank. We've got some new Women's Empowerment Fund that's showing up at the World Bank, thanks to Jim Kim and Ivanka Trump. So I think this is, the fall meeting in October is an opportunity to leverage, the foundation that Jim Kim has laid and the call that he has put forward to ministers of finance, and saying, come to this meeting in October with your plans for how you're going to invest and leverage World Bank resources to invest in nutrition. So that is something that we're looking forward to.
Starting with the question about USAID, I think we know the answer, as Lucy said, but it strikes me, I was reading an article a few days ago by former Administrator Natsios, who's making the point, look, we know what happens if we do this, and that previously there had been a devastating effect on USAID in the loss of technical staff and low numbers of people working. I'll try for 2 beacons of hope. We've seen it at the community level when we bring people together from different sectors to get them to work on nutrition. They love it. They get excited about it. Extension agents are proud that they're doing something about kids' nutrition. So that's a beacon of hope. Another beacon of hope is consensus. And that's this moment that I'm so excited about. For some reason, people in nutrition are oddly contentious. I often say that whenever you have 2 nutritionists in a room, you have at least 3 opinions. But the difference between nutrition and, say, something like malaria was the people in malaria, they all knew what they want to do. The people in pneumonia, they all knew what they want to do. And nutrition, we were just wrestling with each other and fighting. But now we're all on the same page. And I think that globally, we're going to see some important things happen if we don't take our foot off the gas.
my beacon of hope, quite frankly, is Congress. Because when you ask that question, I'm, of course, just thinking about the budget. And I think that, the numbers that we could throw out that I prepared, I thought it doesn't quite matter because it's a proposal, but regardless, it's a political statement that this administration wants to take things down a different path. And as Ryan reminded us, it's a process, and Congress is in charge of the purse. And fortunate for us, we have a lot of congressional champions, whether it's food security or nutrition and even development. There are a lot of people on the Hill who get it and who are ready to fight for this. And so I think while it will be a healthy, robust debate and a process, I think there are plenty of people on the Hill and plenty of people helping advocate and educate new policymakers on the Hill that will continue. The other beacon of hope that I'll just state is a comment that Tom made earlier, but I think it's the progress we've seen on the linkages between ag and nutrition through Feed the Future. And even though it's highly unfortunate but highly probable that we're going to see some cuts to that program, I think the progress, which there's still plenty more to be made, but the progress of seeing projects in the field in terms of agronomists and nutritionists actually working together is progress, and that we're going to continue to see that, to have more integrated development that we all talk about, but to actually have integrated development, mandated by a USAID project that you have to bring those things together for your indicators is when we actually see a difference. Thank you so much for coming. This was a good and lively conversation. I'm so grateful that we were able to have so many of you participate in it, and very grateful for Anne as well as our panelists for a lively conversation. Thank you so much.